I want you to picture something for a second. You're standing in, say, Terminal 3 at the airport in Delhi. You've got a boarding pass in your hand for New York. You just bought a bottle of Swiss chocolate, duty-free, using a credit card that's linked to a bank in Singapore. And on the TV screen above the gate, you see a breaking news ticker about some fugitive billionaire, fighting extradition in London.
Sounds like a pretty standard Tuesday for a lot of people.
Right. And we just take it all for granted. But if you just pause for a second, why does that ticket actually let you cross a border? Why is that Swiss chocolate tax-free? And why can't Indian police just, fly to London and grab that billionaire?
Well, we think the world just works this way, but it's built on something. There's this massive invisible engine running underneath everything.
And you usually only notice that engine when, a gear snaps.
Exactly. When a flight gets canceled because of airspace rights, or a trade war suddenly drives up the price of your phone.
So that is our mission today. We're going to pop the hood on this operating system of the world. We're doing a deep dive into a huge stack of notes on international law, but looking at it specifically through the lens of how it shapes India.
And this isn't about dusty textbooks. These are the rules that decide if someone goes to jail, if you can buy imported goods, and even who owns the bottom of the ocean.
What I love about this stack of notes is it really hones in on that tension. It shows how India, a country with a massive population, a really distinct history, navigates a set of global rules that were, mostly written by Western powers.
It's a constant balancing act,
Yeah.
a real tug of war between playing nice with the world and, protecting your own house.
The classic sovereignty versus cooperation struggle. So we're going to break this down into three main pillars. First, the rules of engagement, how laws are actually made between nations.
And then we'll get into the people. What happens when fugitives and refugees cross the line?
And finally, the frontiers, the fight for money, the ocean, and even outer space.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
Let's jump right in. The notes start with this Latin phrase that sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. Pacta sunt servanda.
It does sound a bit magical, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's actually incredibly practical. It just means agreements must be kept.
Simple enough. You sign it, you stick to it.
Ideally. But just think about the alternative for a second. Out there, there's no world police. If India signs a treaty with Japan and then just decides to ignore it next week, who stops them?
Right, there's no global jail.
None. Pacta sunt servanda is the only thing holding back the chaos. It's this shared belief that a country's word is its bond. If you break that, you don't get fined, you get isolated. And in a global economy, isolation is death.
Okay, so it's basically peer pressure on a global scale. But here's where I got a bit stuck in the notes. Let's say the prime minister goes to Geneva and signs a huge treaty on, banning plastic straws. Does that mean the next day, if I use a plastic straw in Mumbai, I'm breaking the law?
No. And this is a really critical distinction. India follows what legal scholars call the dualist doctrine.
Dualist, as in two separate worlds.
Exactly. In some countries like the U.S., to an extent, once a treaty is signed, it automatically becomes part of the law of the land. But India sees international law and domestic law as two completely separate spheres. The executive branch, the prime minister, the cabinet, they can sign whatever they want internationally. But that signature does not create a law inside India.
So it's a kind of check and balance.
It is. Article 253 of the Constitution is the bridge. It says that for a treaty to actually affect you or me, Parliament has to pass a specific law to transform that international promise into a domestic rule.
So until Parliament acts, that treaty is just...
It's just a piece of paper in a vault in Geneva. It has no power in an Indian court.
That seems like a really good safety valve for democracy. You don't want the government just bypassing Parliament by making foreign treaties, but the notes mention a pretty wild exception to this, the Vishaka case.
Yes. Vishaka v. State of Rajasthan. 1997. This is where those neat lines of dualism get very blurry.
So set the scene for us.
Okay, so in the 90s, there was this glaring gap in Indian law. There was absolutely no specific legislation protecting women from sexual harassment in the workplace.
None.
None.
Yeah.
Women were facing terrible abuse, and the legal system basically just shrugged and said, well, Parliament hasn't passed a law for this yet, so our hands are tied.
Which is horrifying.
It was. So the Supreme Court stepped in. They looked at the situation and said, we have a vacuum here. They looked at international conventions, specifically one called CEDAW, which protects women's rights. And they said, look, India signed this international promise, even if Parliament hasn't made it a law yet. So we are going to use this international standard to write the law ourselves.
Yeah, hold on. Judges aren't supposed to write laws. That's Parliament's job. Isn't that undemocratic?
That is the big criticism. It's called judicial activism. The court effectively bypassed Parliament to enforce an international norm. They created what became known as the Vishaka Guidelines, which became the law of the land for years until Parliament finally passed the Sexual Harassment Act.
Yep.
It just showed that when human rights are on the line, the Indian courts might not wait for the politicians to catch up.
That's a fascinating tension there. You know, we follow the rules except when the rules leave people vulnerable. Speaking of rules, we have to talk about the biggest rule maker of them all, the United Nations.
The UN, topic 13 in the notes.
I was surprised to see India was a founding member of the UN in 1945. That's 2 years before we even got independence.
It's a great trivia point.
Yeah.
India was also a founding member of the League of Nations way back in 1919. We've been at the table for a long, long time. But the notes draw this really sharp contrast between why the League failed and why the UN, for all its faults, has survived.
The League failed because of that unanimity rule, right? Where everyone had to agree.
Which is just a recipe for disaster. Imagine trying to decide on dinner with 50 people, and if one person says no, nobody eats. The League was paralyzed.
So the UN fixed this by being unfair.
You mean the veto power?
Yeah.
Yes. The Security Council. 5 nations, the US, UK, Russia, China, France, got the power to veto anything. And it sounds unfair, and it is, but it's realpolitik. It was the only way to keep the superpowers in the room. If the UN could vote against America's or Russia's core interest, those countries would just leave, and the whole thing would collapse like the League did.
So the system is rigged by design just to ensure...
To ensure the system survives. That's the trade-off. Stability over equality.
Which brings us nicely to our second segment. We've talked about nations getting along. Now let's talk about individuals who don't. Crossing lines. This is the stuff of thriller movies, fugitives, spies, extradition.
Extradition is where the rubber really meets the road. It's easy to talk about global cooperation in the abstract, but when a criminal flees your country, you want them back. And you realize very quickly that your police badge has zero power across the border.
The notes bring up the Abu Salem case. This story is like a Bollywood script. A gangster involved in the 1993 Mumbai blasts flees to Portugal. India wants him back. But it wasn't so simple, was it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
This case perfectly illustrates a legal nugget called the rule of speciality.
Okay, explain that. Because to the average person, it seems like if you catch a bad guy, you should be able to throw the book at him for everything he's ever done.
You would think so. But extradition is a contract. Portugal doesn't have the death penalty. In fact, under European law, they can't send someone to a country where they might face execution or, say, an indefinite sentence. So Portugal said, we will give you Abu Salem, but you have to promise in writing no death penalty and no jail time longer than 25 years.
And India had to agree.
If they wanted him back, yes. But here's the kicker. Once he was back in India, prosecutors wanted to add more charges. They wanted to be tough. But the Supreme Court in 2011 stepped in and said no. They ruled that India had to honor the promise it made to Portugal.
Why?
Because if India breaks its word to Portugal today, no other country will extradite a fugitive to India tomorrow. Trust is everything.
So the rule of speciality basically means you can only try them for what's on the receipt. You can't add extra toppings later.
That's a very consumerist way to put it, but yes, that's exactly right. It preserves trust between nations.
But there are loopholes, aren't there? What about this political offense exception? I've heard of people claiming they're political rebels to avoid being sent back.
That used to be the golden ticket. If you could prove your crime was political, like trying to overthrow a dictator, you wouldn't be extradited. But in the age of modern terrorism, that loophole has been slammed shut. Most modern treaties now explicitly say that terrorism is never a political offense. You can't blow up a bus and call it a protest.
Good to know. Okay, let's flip the direction. What about people fleeing into India? Topic 8 covers asylum. And this seems like a massive contradiction. We have the Dalai Lama, Tibetan refugees, Sri Lankan refugees. But the notes say India has no refugee law.
It is one of the most confusing aspects of our law. India is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. We don't have a Refugee Act.
Yeah.
So legally, if you cross the border without a visa, you are just a foreigner under the Foreigners Act, 1946. And that act gives the government the power to deport you, just like that.
So all these refugees living here, are they just living on borrowed time? Is it totally up to the government's mood on any given day?
In theory, yes. It's executive discretion. But, once again, The Supreme Court has intervened to fill the moral gap. In cases like NHRC v. State of Arunachal Pradesh, the court ruled that Article 21 of the Constitution, the right to life, applies to everyone on Indian soil, not just citizens.
That's a powerful distinction.
It is. It means the government can't just take a group of refugees and throw them into a situation where they'll be killed. It violates the principle of non-refoulement. So while we don't have a refugee law, we have constitutional protection. It's a messy, typically Indian solution, but it works.
Before we leave human rights, we have to touch on the super norms. The notes call it jus cogens.
Jus cogens. These are the absolute lines in the sand. I mean, there are thousands of treaties and countries can agree to almost anything, but jus cogens are the rules you can never break. Prohibition of genocide, slavery, torture, piracy.
So if two countries signed a treaty saying, hey, let's trade slaves, that treaty is automatically garbage.
It's void, ab initio, from the beginning.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if both parliaments ratified it. It violates the conscience of humanity.
I like that. The conscience of humanity has legal standing. Okay, let's shift gears. We've done the moral stuff. Let's talk about the money. Segment 3, economics.
You can't understand the world without understanding the plumbing of the global economy. And the two big pipes are the IMF and the WTO.
The IMF International Monetary Fund. Now, in India, this name brings up some trauma from 1991.
It does. The balance of payments crisis. We literally ran out of foreign currency. We had weeks of import cover left. We couldn't buy oil. We had to physically airlift our gold reserves to London as collateral just to get a loan.
That image of the gold flying out is just iconic. But the IMF loan, it wasn't free money. It came with conditionality.
Right. The IMF is the lender of last resort. When no one else will touch you, they will. But they're like a strict doctor. They said, you are sick because your economy is closed and inefficient. We'll give you the cash, but you have to take this medicine. And that medicine was the LPG reforms, liberalization, privatization, globalization.
So, in a way, an international bank dictated India's entire domestic economic policy.
They forced the door open, yes. And that led us right to the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And this is where the fight continues today.
The notes mention the most favored nation principle, or MFN. It sounds like you pick a best friend and give them special deals.
It's the exact opposite. Most favored nation means you have to treat everyone like your best friend. If India lowers the tariff on, say, Swiss watches, it has to lower that same tariff for every other WTO member, too. You can't discriminate.
But this creates a huge problem for India, specifically with farming.
This is the biggest flashpoint. The WTO pushes for free markets. No subsidies, let the market decide prices. But in India, agriculture isn't just a business. It's a livelihood for hundreds of millions of people. The government buys crops at a minimum support price, the MSP, to keep farmers from starving.
And the WTO sees that as a trade distortion.
Exactly. Rich countries say your subsidized wheat is too cheap, it's unfair competition. And India argues this isn't about trade, it's about food security. We are not going to let our people go hungry to satisfy a rulebook from Geneva.
It's a classic clash.
It is. Global efficiency versus local survival.
It seems like India is always the one saying, your rules don't quite fit our reality. We see that with the International Criminal Court, the ICC, too. Why isn't India a member? Don't we want to prosecute war criminals?
We do, but India believes the ICC is flawed. The main issue goes back to the UN Security Council. The Security Council can refer cases to the ICC, even for countries that haven't signed the treaty.
So the U.S. or China could use the UN to sic the ICC on a country they don't like while they themselves are immune.
That's the fear. India sees the ICC not as an impartial court, but as a potential political tool for the powerful nations to bully the developing ones. It goes back to sovereignty. India just refuses to hand over its judicial power to a body it can't fully trust.
It's a theme, isn't it? We'll play the game, but we will not hand over the controller. Okay, final segment. We're leaving land behind and looking at the frontiers. The sea, the sky, and space.
This is where geography gets really weird. Let's start with the ocean. You'd think the water is just water, but legally it's zoned like a city.
We have the Exclusive Economic Zone, the EEZ, that's 200 nautical miles out from the coast.
Correct. Inside that zone, India owns all the resources, the fish, the oil, the gas. But we don't own the water itself for navigation. Ships from other countries can pass through.
But this gets messy. The notes discuss the Intercalexi case, the Italian Marines.
Oh, this was a diplomatic nightmare. 2 Italian Marines on a commercial tanker shot and killed 2 Indian fishermen off the coast of Kerala. They said they thought they were pirates.
And the huge question was, where did it happen?
Exactly. India said, "It happened in our contiguous zone. Our fishermen are dead. We're trying them for murder." Italy said, "No, it happened in international waters, and they are military personnel, so they have sovereign immunity. India has no jurisdiction."
It turned into a years-long saga.
It did. It went all the way to an international tribunal, and eventually it was ruled that while India had a right to compensation, the Marines had immunity and had to be tried in Italy. It just shows that even if you commit a crime where you are on the map down to the nautical mile, changes everything.
And the map is expanding. We're not just looking at the water, we're looking at the seabed. This idea of the common heritage of mankind.
This is one of the most beautiful and idealistic concepts in international law. It states that the deep seabed and outer space, for that matter, belongs to nobody and everybody. You can't just plant a flag on the bottom of the ocean and say, "This is India."
But you can mine it. Because I see here India is a pioneer investor with the International Seabed Authority.
Yes, we are hunting for polymetallic nodules.
Which sounds like something from Star Trek.
They're basically potato-sized rocks sitting on the ocean floor, 6,000 meters down. But they are packed with manganese, nickel, cobalt, all the stuff we need for EV batteries and smartphones.
So if India digs them up, do we get to keep the money?
We do, but because it's the common heritage of mankind, we have to share some of the benefits of the technology with the rest of the world. We act as stewards, not just owners.
What about space? Is Elon Musk going to mine the moon and keep it all?
That is the trillion-dollar question. The Outer Space Treaty says you can't own the moon. But countries like the U.S. and private companies are now arguing that while you can't own the land, you can own the resources you extract. It is the Wild West up there right now.
And closer to home, the sky. I learned about the 5 freedoms of air. I honestly thought if you had a plane, you could just fly it.
Not a chance. Every inch of sky above a country is sovereign territory. You need the first freedom just to fly over India without landing. If you don't have it, you get shot down or escorted out.
So a flight from London to Sydney has to negotiate rights with every single country it flies over.
It's all pre-negotiated in bilateral air service agreements. These rights are traded like currency. I'll let your airline land in Mumbai if you let my airline land in Heathrow. It's an incredibly complex web keeping those planes in the air.
It really is an invisible web. You can't drill, you can't fly, you can't even arrest a bad guy without tripping over some treaty.
And if you zoom out, you see India's strategy. It's this mix of dualism and universalism.
Can you unpack that a bit?
On one hand, India is fiercely protective. We use dualism to stop treaties from overriding Parliament. We stay out of the ICC to protect our sovereignty. We demand strict extradition rules. But on the other hand, we are deeply embedded in the system. We're in the UN, the WTO. We're mining the seabed under international licenses.
It's like India is saying, we will sit at the table, but we're bringing our own chair.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Before we sign off, I have to mention one last little did you know from the notes about recognition of states. The difference between de facto and de jure, it felt very high school dating.
It is exactly like dating versus marriage. De facto recognition means, okay, I acknowledge you exist and I'll talk to you, but I'm not ready to commit. De jure is a full marriage embassies, ambassadors, permanent legal status.
And the example used was Israel.
Yes. India recognized Israel de facto in 1950, but we didn't establish full de jure diplomatic relations until 1992. That's a 42-year engagement period.
Why wait so long?
Geopolitics. India had to balance its relationship with the Arab world and its own internal politics. It just shows that in international law, sometimes patience is a weapon. You can recognize a reality without legally committing to it until the timing is perfect.
A great final lesson. So we've covered the sea, the sky, the treaties, the fugitives. But I want to leave you with a provocative thought based on topic 17, which talks about codification, writing down the rules.
We have a law of the sea. We have a law of outer space.
But we don't have a law of the cyber realm.
We don't. And that is the next battlefield.
Exactly. If a hacker in Russia attacks a server in Mumbai, is that an act of war? Is it a crime? Can we extradite them? All the old definitions of sovereignty just fall apart when borders are lines of code.
And how India asserts its digital sovereignty, maybe a digital exclusive economic zone.
Yeah.
That's going to be the story of the next 20 years.
Something to think about the next time you log on. That's it for today's deep dive into the invisible web. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.